My name is Veronica Langston, and 3 years ago, I made a decision that would change everything. I became poor. Not actually poor. God knows I had more money than most people see in a lifetime, but poor in the eyes of everyone who claimed to love me. And let me tell you, when you strip away the designer clothes and the luxury car, you discover people who really are underneath all their pretty words and fake smiles. But before we dive into this incredible story of how one forgotten grandmother turned the tables in the most epic way possible, smash that like button if you love seeing justice served. Subscribe for more revenge stories that will blow your mind. And comment below telling me where in the world you're watching from. It started the day we buried my husband, Grant, October 15th, 2021. The leaves in Raleigh were just beginning to turn, that brilliant gold that makes you think autumn might last forever. The funeral home smelled like lilies and grief, and I remember standing there in my black Armani dress, watching our son Miles cry real tears, while his wife Cassandra checked her phone behind her sunglasses. Even then, even in that moment of raw pain, she couldn't be present. She was already calculating, already planning. Grant and I had built something beautiful together, not just our marriage, but our software licensing empire. We were the quiet millionaires, the ones who drove modest cars and lived in nice but not ostentatious homes. Our wealth was invisible to most people, tucked away in investments, real estate across 5 states, and bank accounts that most would consider fantasy numbers. We had over $10 million, but we lived like we had 10,000. It was our choice, our way of staying grounded. But when Grant died, everything shifted. Suddenly, I was the widow, the burden, the old woman who needed taking care of. I'll never forget the conversation that started it all. It was 3 weeks after the funeral, and Miles and Cassandra had come over to check on me. They sat on my Italian leather sofa, the one Grant and I had picked out together in Florence 20 years earlier, and Cassandra leaned forward with this practiced look of concern. "Veronica," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "Miles and I have been talking, and we think you should move in with us. This big house is just too much for one person." Miles nodded eagerly. "Mom, we just want to help. The mortgage, the utilities, all of it. It's got to be overwhelming." I almost laughed. Mortgage? We'd paid off the house 15 years ago. But I looked at Cassandra's face, saw the way her eyes were already cataloging my possessions, probably calculating their worth. She thought she was being subtle, but I spent 30 years in aerospace engineering. I knew how to read people, how to spot structural weaknesses. "That's very kind of you both," I said carefully. "Let me think about it." That night, I called my lawyer, David Richardson. We'd known each other for 25 years, and he'd helped Grant and I set up our entire financial structure. When I told him about the conversation, he was quiet for a long moment. "David," he finally said, "are you sure about this? Some people show their true colors when money's involved." "That's exactly what I'm counting on," I replied. The plan was simple, but required sacrifice that would test every fiber of my being. I would appear to lose everything, or at least everything visible. The transformation began on a gray November morning when the moving truck arrived at my beautiful 4-bedroom colonial. I watched strangers carry out furniture that held decades of memories. The dining room table where Miles had done his homework, the rocking chair where I'd nursed him through countless childhood illnesses, the piano Grant had surprised me with for our 20th anniversary. I moved into a cramped, dingy apartment on the wrong side of town, a place that made my heart sink every time I climbed the stained concrete steps to the 3rd floor. The apartment smelled like old cigarettes and disappointment, with thin walls that let me hear my neighbors' every argument, every late-night television show, every crying baby. The heater clanged like a ghost in chains, keeping me awake during those first terrible nights when I questioned whether this elaborate charade was worth the answers I might find. The bathroom had a crack running down the mirror that split my reflection in half. The kitchen was barely large enough for one person, with appliances that belonged in a museum and a refrigerator that hummed so loudly I could hear it from the bedroom. At night, I'd lie on the lumpy mattress I'd bought at a discount store and stare at the water stain on the ceiling, shaped like a bird with broken wings. I traded my BMW for a 15-year-old Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door and an air conditioning system that had given up years ago. The car smelled like the pine air freshener the previous owner had used to mask something less pleasant, and the radio only picked up 2 stations clearly. Designer clothes became thrift store finds, polyester blouses that made me itch, shoes that pinched my feet, handbags with broken zippers and mysterious stains. My weekly manicures became chipped nails and rough hands. I stopped coloring my hair, letting the gray grow out in ways that made me look older, more fragile, more like the struggling widow I was pretending to be. But here's the thing nobody knew. I still owned the house Miles and Cassandra moved into. The deed was still in my name, hidden in a legal structure so complex that even a team of lawyers would need weeks to untangle it. The mortgage help they thought they were giving me? That money went straight into a separate account I monitored daily, every transaction documented with obsessive precision. Every payment, every utilities bill, every grocery run they claimed to cover, I tracked it all in spreadsheets that would have made my old aerospace engineering colleagues proud. I hired a private investigator, a former police detective named Sarah Chen, who specialized in domestic surveillance. Sarah was everything you'd want in someone you trusted with your secrets: thorough, discreet, and completely unimpressed by family drama. She documented everything: where Cassandra went during the day, what she bought, who she talked to, what she posted on social media. The picture that emerged was of a woman living far beyond what she claimed were her means, while publicly performing the role of the sacrificial daughter-in-law. The first few months were the hardest psychological challenge of my life. I'd wake up in that awful apartment, hearing Mrs. Chen next door yelling at her son in Mandarin, while her television blared Korean dramas at volumes that violated several noise ordinances. For a moment, in that space between sleep and waking, I forget where I was. I'd reach for my silk robe and find polyester instead. I'd go to make coffee with my expensive espresso machine, only to remember I was back to instant crystals and hot water from a plastic electric kettle that made everything taste slightly metallic. But then I'd remember why I was doing this, and the discomfort became bearable, even meaningful. I was conducting the most important experiment of my life, testing the people I loved most in the world to see if their love was conditional on what I could provide for them. Miles called every few days at first, his voice tight with worry. "Mom, how are you managing? Do you need anything?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," I'd tell him, letting my voice sound just tired enough. "Getting by." Cassandra's behavior was more revealing and more insidious than I had initially imagined. She started small, little digs disguised as concern that were designed to chip away at my self-worth. When they'd pick me up for dinner, she'd wrinkle her nose at my thrift store sweater and say, "Oh, Veronica, we really should take you shopping soon. I can't stand seeing you in this." Or she'd comment on my chipped nail polish. "You know, there are senior discounts at most salons. I could make you an appointment if you'd like." But it was the way she talked about me to others that really opened my eyes. Sarah, my private investigator, had placed listening devices in strategic locations, all perfectly legal since I owned the house, and the recordings were enlightening. Cassandra would get on the phone with her friends and complain about Miles's pathetic mother, who was dragging us down and making our lives miserable. She referred to me as the deadweight and joked about how some people just refuse to die with dignity. The most chilling recording was from a conversation she had with someone named Ashley, apparently a friend from her college days who had married well. "You wouldn't believe how pathetic she is," Cassandra said, her voice dripping with contempt. "She sits in that disgusting apartment feeling sorry for herself instead of doing anything productive. I keep telling Miles we should just put her in a nursing home and be done with it, but he's too soft. Sometimes I think it would be better for everyone if she just stopped being such a burden." I played the part perfectly, becoming the ideal victim for her psychological manipulation. I let my hair go completely gray, something I'd been fighting with expensive salon visits for 10 years. I learned to look defeated when opening my wallet, to hesitate before ordering anything but the cheapest item on the menu, to apologize for existing in spaces where I had once commanded respect. I became the perfect picture of a struggling widow, and I watched how it changed everything about how people treated me. Cashiers at grocery stores began treating me with pitying condescension instead of professional courtesy. Waitresses would speak to me slower and louder, as if poverty had affected my hearing. Even my own neighbors in the apartment building looked at me like a cautionary tale, a reminder of how quickly life could fall apart for elderly women. But the most painful part was watching how it affected my relationship with Miles. The stress of believing he was supporting two households was taking a visible toll on him. He was losing weight, working overtime constantly, and I could see the exhaustion in every line of his body. He never complained, never made me feel unwanted, but I could see him aging in real time under the pressure of what he thought was his responsibility. During one particularly difficult visit, I watched him fall asleep at the dinner table while Cassandra rattled on about some influencer drama. He was exhausted from working a 60-hour week, and when he jerked awake with an apologetic smile, I felt a stab of guilt, so sharp it took my breath away. Was this test worth what I was putting him through? The dinner that broke everything happened on a cold evening. In February, when the winter seemed like it might never end. Snow was falling outside in those fat, lazy flakes that make the world look like a snow globe. But there was nothing magical about that night. The wind was howling around the house, my house, making the windows rattle and the whole structure creak with the cold. I'd taken the bus to their house, a journey that took over an hour and involved 2 transfers in weather that cut through my thin thrift store coat like ice water. My cheeks were wind-burned, and my shoes were damp from walking through slush when I arrived. Cassandra answered the door in a silk blouse that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and I could see her taking inventory of my bedraggled appearance with barely concealed disgust. "You're late," she said, not moving aside to let me in immediately. She let me stand in the cold for a few extra seconds while she finished typing something on her phone. "Dinner's getting cold." I mumbled an apology about the bus being delayed. The 6:15 had broken down, and I'd had to wait for the 6:45, and followed her into the dining room. The house smelled like roast chicken and rosemary, scents that should have been comforting, but felt almost mocking given my state. The table was set with the good china, my good china, inherited from Grant's grandmother and worth more than the car I was now driving. They'd been using it regularly, I noticed. When you're poor, people stop saving things for special occasions. The dining room was warm and beautifully lit, with candles flickering on the mahogany sideboard and soft jazz playing from the sound system Grant and I had installed 5 years earlier. It was the picture of domestic comfort, except for the tension that seemed to thicken the air like humidity. Miles looked exhausted in a way that made my heart ache. He'd been working long hours at his data analysis job, staying late to take on extra projects that might lead to bonuses, trying to make ends meet while supporting what he thought was my desperate financial situation. The stress was written in the lines around his eyes, the way he kept rubbing his temples, the slight tremor in his hands that I recognized as a sign of too much caffeine and too little sleep. "How was your week, Mom?" he asked, passing me the mashed potatoes. "Oh, I said, keeping my voice small. Same old, same old. Applied for a few jobs at the grocery stores, but they're not really hiring people my age." Cassandra's fork clinked against her plate with just a little too much force. "Jobs?" she laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Veronica, you're 72 years old. What kind of jobs could you possibly do?" "Well," I said carefully, "there's greeting at Walmart or maybe something at a library." "This is ridiculous," Cassandra snapped, her mask finally slipping. "Miles, we can't keep supporting dead weight forever. Your mother needs to contribute something. Anything." Miles looked uncomfortable. "Cassie, she's trying." "Trying? Miles, look at her. She sits around that depressing apartment all day, then comes here expecting us to feed her and solve all her problems. Meanwhile, we're drowning trying to keep up with everything." I felt something cold settle in my stomach, but I kept my expression neutral. This was what I'd been waiting for, the moment when the mask came completely off. "I understand this is difficult," I said quietly. "Difficult?" Cassandra stood up so fast her chair scraped against the hardwood floor. "Difficult? Do you know what's difficult? Watching my husband work himself to death trying to support a mother who won't even try to support herself. Do you know what's difficult? Having to explain to our friends why we can't go out anymore because all our money goes to supporting someone who could get a job but chooses not to." Miles was staring at his wife like he'd never seen her before. "Cassie, what are you saying?" But Cassandra wasn't done. 3 years of playing the perfect daughter-in-law had reached its breaking point. "I'm saying exactly what needs to be said. Veronica, get a job and stop being a leech. Stop draining us dry. Stop being dead weight." The words hung in the air like smoke. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, the same clock that had marked time in my real home for 15 years. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. I set down my fork very carefully and looked at Cassandra. Really looked at her. She was beautiful, I'll give her that. Blonde hair perfectly styled, makeup flawless even after a long day, clothes that cost more than some people's cars. But beauty, I'd learned in 72 years of living, was just packaging. What mattered was what was inside. "Sweetheart," I said, my voice calm as still water, "find a new place to live." Cassandra blinked, clearly not expecting that response. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Find somewhere else to live. You have 30 days. Miles finally found his voice. "Mom, what are you talking about? This is our house." "No," I said, still looking at Cassandra. "It's my house. It's always been my house. The mortgage you think you've been helping me with, I've been depositing those payments into a separate account. Every single one." The color drained from her face. "That's impossible. You don't have money. You live in that horrible apartment." "Because I chose to," I said simply. "Because I wanted to see who you really were when you thought I had nothing to offer." Miles was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. "Mom, I don't understand." I pulled out my phone, not the ancient flip phone I'd been carrying, but my real iPhone, which I kept hidden in my purse. I showed them both a screenshot of one of my bank account balances. Just one of them. $2,347,891. Miles's fork clattered to his plate. Cassandra grabbed the phone, staring at the screen like it might be fake. "That's just one account," I said quietly. "Your father and I were very good at what we did, Miles. We built something incredible together. But we never flaunted it because we wanted to know that people loved us for who we were, not what we had. You've been lying to us for 3 years?" Miles's voice was barely a whisper. "I've been testing you for 3 years," I corrected. "And I'm sorry to say that one of you failed spectacularly." Cassandra was scrolling through my phone now, her eyes growing wider with each account she found. This is over $10 million. Closer to 12, actually. plus real estate, investments, and a few other assets. I took my phone back gently. Your father and I started a software licensing company in 1987. We were very, very good at it. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the heater clicking on, the distant sound of a car door slamming somewhere in the neighborhood. Miles was looking at his hands, and I could see the wheels turning in his mind. 3 years of stress, of working overtime, of believing his mother was struggling while his wife spent money like water. Why? He finally asked. Because I needed to know, I said simply. When your father died, I became vulnerable in a way I'd never been before. People see a widow and they either want to rescue her or take advantage of her. I needed to know which one you were. Cassandra found her voice again, and it came out as a snarl. You manipulative bitch. Do you know what you've put us through? What I've put you through? I laughed, and I let her hear the steel underneath. Cassandra, you just called me a leech and dead weight. You told me to get a job like I was some sort of burden you'd been carrying. And now you're angry because you find out I was never a burden at all? You lied to us. I tested you. I corrected again. And you, my dear, showed me exactly who you are. Miles, on the other hand, I looked at my son, saw the confusion and hurt in his eyes. Mom, I would have helped you even if you were actually poor. You didn't need to test me. I know that now. I'm sorry it took me so long to be sure. What happened next unfolded like dominoes falling. Cassandra, realizing her comfortable life was about to disappear, went into full manipulation mode. She cried, she screamed, she tried to convince Miles that I was mentally unfit, that rich old women who pretend to be poor must be suffering from dementia. When that didn't work, she got dangerous. I found out later, much later, that she'd already been to see a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but one who specialized in elder law and guardianship cases. She'd been building a case to have me declared mentally incompetent with herself and Miles as my guardians. She had documentation of my erratic behavior, my poor living conditions, and my inability to manage my affairs. If her plan had worked, she would have gained legal control over everything Grant and I had built together. But Cassandra made a crucial mistake. She underestimated me. 2 weeks after the dinner, she filed a police report. She claimed that Miles and I were engaging in elder financial abuse, that we were hiding money from her, manipulating financial records, and potentially stealing from elderly accounts. It was a masterpiece of projection, accusing us of exactly what she had been planning to do to me. The police took it seriously, as they should have. Financial elder abuse is a real problem, and they've seen too many families torn apart by greed. Detective Maria Santos came to my apartment, my real apartment, not the dingy one I'd been pretending to live in, on a Thursday morning in March. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked around my actual living space, the penthouse I'd moved back into after the dinner revelation, and I could see her trying to reconcile this with whatever story Cassandra had told. Mrs. Langston, we've received some concerning reports about your financial situation. I imagine you have, I said, pouring her coffee from my expensive espresso machine. Would you like to see my documentation? For the next 3 hours, I showed Detective Santos everything. Bank statements going back 5 years, legal documents establishing my competency signed by 3 different doctors, security footage from my real apartment showing me coming and going normally for months, email records showing my correspondence with financial advisors, lawyers, and business associates. But the real bombshell was the surveillance footage I'd been collecting. You see, I explained to the detective, when someone is planning to have you declared mentally incompetent, you develop a healthy sense of paranoia. I've had cameras in the house, my house, that Miles and Cassandra were living in for months. I also had a private investigator following Cassandra for the past 6 weeks. The footage was devastating. Cassandra meeting with lawyers. Cassandra on the phone with someone, clearly discussing plans to get control of the old bat's money. Cassandra at expensive restaurants, paying with credit cards she'd told Miles were maxed out while complaining about supporting me. But the most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source. Dr. Leo Crandall had been Grant's business partner and co-founder of our software company. He was also one of the most respected businessmen in Raleigh, known for his integrity and his philanthropic work. When he heard about the police investigation, word travels fast in certain circles. He came forward with information that stunned even me. "Veronica," he said, sitting in his wood-paneled office overlooking downtown Raleigh, "I need to tell you something about Cassandra." It turned out that 6 months earlier, Cassandra had reached out to Leo under the guise of needing business mentorship. She told him she was interested in starting her own social media consulting firm and needed guidance from successful entrepreneurs. What she was really doing was testing the waters, trying to see if she could manipulate him the same way she'd been manipulating Miles. Leo, being a gentleman, had agreed to meet with her, but when Cassandra showed up to their coffee meeting in a dress that left little to the imagination and started asking pointed questions about his personal life, his investments, and his loneliness since his wife had died, Leo realized what was happening. He'd kept all her emails, recorded their phone conversations with proper legal notification, and documented every attempt she made to seduce him. When she realized he wasn't going to be her next victim, she'd become vindictive, sending him messages calling him a dried-up old fool and threatening to tell everyone what kind of man you really are. "She's done this before, Veronica," Leo told me, sliding a thick folder across his desk. "I hired a private investigator after she started making threats. Cassandra has a history. 3 previous relationships with older, wealthy men. Each one ended with accusations of abuse when she couldn't get access to their money." The police investigation took 6 weeks. During that time, Cassandra became increasingly desperate. She started a social media campaign about elder abuse awareness, painting herself as a concerned daughter-in-law trying to protect an elderly woman from financial predators. She gave interviews to local news stations, crying crocodile tears about how hard it was to watch someone she loved being taken advantage of. But the truth has a way of coming out, especially when it's backed by documentation, surveillance footage, and witness testimony from respected members of the community. On May 15, 2024, Cassandra was arrested on charges of filing false police reports, attempted financial exploitation of an elderly person, and fraud. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Not just my documentation, but testimonies from Leo, from the private investigator, from the lawyers she'd consulted about having me declared incompetent. The trial was swift and decisive. Cassandra's defense attorney tried to paint her as a confused young woman who genuinely believed she was protecting her family. But the prosecution had emails, recordings, and financial records that told a very different story. The judge, a stern woman named Patricia Williams, showed no mercy. "Miss Cassandra Langston," she said, her voice echoing through the courtroom, "you systematically planned to defraud an elderly woman of her life savings. You manipulated your husband, filed false police reports, and attempted to destroy the reputation of innocent people for your own financial gain. This court finds you guilty on all counts." The sentence was everything I could have hoped for. 1 year in county jail, 6 years of probation, and restitution of $32,847 in legal fees, investigation costs, and damages. She was also required to undergo psychological evaluation and attend mandatory counseling for manipulative behavior. But the real justice wasn't the jail time or the money. It was watching her perfect facade crumble in front of everyone who mattered. The social media campaign backfired spectacularly when the truth came out. Her influencer friends disappeared overnight. The local news stations that had initially given her sympathetic coverage now ran exposés about her manipulation tactics. Miles, to his credit, handled everything with more grace than I expected. The divorce was finalized while Cassandra was still in jail. He moved out of my house and into a small apartment downtown, telling me he needed time to process everything that had happened. "Mom," he said to me one evening in late summer, "I keep thinking about all the signs I missed. The way she treated service workers, how she talked about other people when she thought nobody was listening. I feel like such an idiot." We were sitting on my real front porch, the one attached to my actual home, watching the sunset over Raleigh. The air smelled like jasmine and possibility, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt truly at peace. "You're not an idiot," I told him. "You're a good man who wanted to believe the best about someone you loved. That's not a character flaw, sweetheart. That's what makes you worthy of real love." 6 months later, Miles started dating Elise Crawford, a quiet architect he'd known since childhood. She was the opposite of Cassandra in every way that mattered. Thoughtful instead of flashy, kind instead of calculating, genuine instead of performing. When I met her, she looked me in the eye and shook my hand firmly, asking about my work in aerospace engineering instead of commenting on my clothes or my house. "I like her," I told Miles after she'd gone home. "She knows about everything," he said quietly. "About Cassandra, about the money, about the test. I told her I needed her to know who she was getting involved with." And what did she say? Miles smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him in years. She said any woman smart enough to outsmart a gold digger was someone she wanted to get to know better. On Christmas morning 2024, I gave Miles a deed. Not to the house he'd been living in, that was staying with me, but to a beautiful colonial in the historic district of Raleigh. It was smaller than the other house, but full of character, with original hardwood floors and a garden that would bloom spectacular in the spring. "Mom," he said, staring at the papers, "I can't accept this." "You're not accepting it," I said. "You're receiving it. There's a difference. This is me choosing to share my blessings with someone who proved they deserved them." As I write this now, it's been almost a year since Cassandra was released from jail. She moved to Charlotte, where she's apparently working at a cosmetics counter and living with a roommate. Miles and Elise are engaged, planning a small wedding for next fall. And me? I'm living exactly the life Grant and I always dreamed of. I travel when I want to travel. I donate to causes I believe in. I volunteer at the local literacy center teaching adults how to read. I drive my BMW again, but I also keep the old Honda because sometimes it's nice to be invisible. I wear my good jewelry, but I also keep some of my thrift store clothes because they remind me of an important lesson. People often ask me if I regret the 3 years of pretending to be poor, if I think the test was too harsh, too elaborate, too cruel. But here's what I learned. When you strip away everything external, the money, the clothes, the house, the car, what remains is the truth of who people are. And the truth, however painful, is always worth knowing. Cassandra saw a vulnerable widow and decided to take advantage. Miles saw his mother in need and decided to sacrifice his own comfort to help. Both responses revealed character, just different kinds. The money was never really the point. The money was just the tool that revealed everything else. I'm 75 now, and I wake up every morning grateful for the clarity that test gave me. I know exactly who loves me and why. I know exactly who I can trust with my vulnerabilities. And I know that the wealth Grant and I built together will go to people who understand its real value, not as an end in itself, but as a means to live with dignity, to help others, and to leave the world a little better than you found it. Sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet and the moonlight streams through my bedroom windows, I think about Cassandra. I wonder if she learned anything from her year in jail. If she understands now that real wealth isn't something you can steal or manipulate your way into. Real wealth is built on trust, on love, on decades of shared dreams and mutual respect. But mostly, I think about Grant and how proud he would be of the woman I became in his absence. not because I outsmarted a gold digger or protected our money, but because I had the courage to demand the love I deserved and the wisdom to recognize it when I found it. In the end, that's the real victory. Not the revenge, not the justice, not even the money. It's the peace of mind that comes from knowing you've lived with integrity, even when others haven't. It's the quiet satisfaction of watching your real family flourish while the pretenders fade away into irrelevance. Money, I learned, doesn't corrupt people. It reveals them. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is step back and let people reveal themselves completely. Because the truth, however painful in the moment, is always sets you free in the end.